I pondered over the recent weeks, struggling to find concrete evidence of her infidelity. A sense of uneasiness had enveloped me, fueled by a series of small incidents that left me with a lingering feeling of discomfort. While I had a notion that something was awry, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Although I was somewhat certain that there was something going on, I lacked proof and details about who, what, or where it might be happening. Doubts about my own sanity began to creep in, making me question whether I was overreacting or fabricating scenarios of her betrayal. Despite my uncertainty, my instincts were in turmoil, indicating that there was indeed something going on. It could be early stages of an affair, perhaps a fleeting encounter. Strangely, the more I contemplated these thoughts, the more convinced I became. I had been grappling with these concerns for what felt like an eternity, but how long had the situation been unfolding before I became even slightly aware that something was amiss? Taking another sip of my drink, I signaled the bartender, who nodded with a knowing smile, having witnessed that troubled expression countless times before. Surveying the quiet bar filled with indistinct conversations, I couldn't help but notice the lack of joy in the faces of the patrons. They'd all seemed plain, unremarkable, and average. The only woman in the establishment, in her 40s, appeared slightly desperate, accepting drinks from an older man. He seemed hopeful, though it was clear she already had him figured out. The other customers were simply passing time as the rain outside continued to dampen their spirits. Soon, they would exhaust all reasons to stay in the comfort of the bar and make their way home. I remained undecided about my next move. It was then that I heard a voice, and there she was, looking at me with eyes that seemed to delve into the depths of my soul. As I tried to form a response, words escaped me. In a dimly lit bar, with drops of water cascading from her coat, Sammy began to remove it, and I questioned her presence. Curiosity piqued, I asked her why she was here. Sammy explained that she had been worried about me and had a feeling she would find me at the bar. She suggested we talk. I stared at her, pondering her motives. Could I trust her? To steady myself, I took a sip of my drink and ordered her a vodka and soda. We waited for the bartender to move away before resuming our conversation, our eyes betraying uncertainty and a subtle struggle for control. Sammy remarked that my recent behavior had caught her attention, sensing that I was carrying a heavy burden. I looked into her brown eyes, but quickly averted my gaze. There was an unspoken understanding between us. I reassured her that everything was fine between us, attempting to downplay the situation. However, she remained unconvinced. My heart sank as I realized my attempts to minimize the issue were futile. Placing her glass on the table, Sammy intertwined her fingers and leaned slightly forward. She told me that she knew what was happening. Confusion washed over me, and I feigned ignorance, but Sammy insisted that we move to a more secluded area for privacy. Reluctantly agreeing, I asked her what she thought she knew, deflecting the conversation. Sammy saw through my facade, asserting that I couldn't deceive her after our long history. She encouraged me to open up, insisting that I needed someone to confide in. I had known Sammy since she was 17 years old. She had always been a constant presence in my life, and at one point, she had a crush on me when I was dating her older sister Claire. Despite their differences, Sammy and I had always gotten along, occasionally leading to clashes with Claire. Claire and I got married after 2 years, and settled into what I believed was a perfect future. Both of us had decent jobs, providing us with a comfortable life. Sammy, my sister-in-law, had enjoyed her late teens and early 20s, and was now seeking a more mature phase in life at 25. She had transformed into someone any man would be lucky to have by his side. Claire and I had been married for 5 years, with our anniversary approaching in a month. However, thoughts about whether we would make it that far lingered in my mind. Sammy, an attractive woman and also a friend, looked at me as tears welled up in my eyes, struggling to express my emotions, while her words, I know, reverberated in my head. Sammy reached across the table, offering her support as her fingertips gently caressed mine. I felt my heart shattering slowly as she continued to speak. She mentioned that if I wouldn't admit it, she would. She believed that Claire was being unfaithful to me. Despite the shock of her revelation, I stubbornly tried to process what I knew and its potential ramifications. I resisted hearing more, convincing myself that if I didn't acknowledge it, it couldn't be happening, sparing myself from the pain of facing the truth. Sammy noticed my distant expression and questioned whether it was shock or denial. She professed her love for me and implored me to open my eyes, suggesting that it might all be a misunderstanding. In response, I tried to take her aside and continued to deceive myself. Sammy's eyes flashed with anger, and she exclaimed, drawing the bartender's attention. I assured the bartender that everything was fine. Sammy apologized, expressing her disappointment with me and emphasizing her concern for my well-being. She urged me to open my eyes and face reality, emphasizing that we need to act. I agreed to start, and Sammy shared her suspicions. She told a story about an incident a few weeks ago when she was with my partner and got a call on her phone. Sammy found it strange that she left the room to answer the phone, considering they were sisters. I nodded, feeling a sense of unease. Continuing her story, Sammy said that she checked my partner's phone and found that there was no lock code on it. The call was from a guy who was saved under the name Robert. Sammy didn't know anyone named Robert or Bob, but she decided to watch the repetition. I asked about the identity of this guy named Robert or Bob, asking for clarification. After a week, Sammy found out the identity of the guy my partner was texting with. This was a man she knew many years ago, before our relationship began. Apparently, they reconnected via social media or chat sites, and their correspondence lasted for several weeks. I admitted that I did not know about these communications. I only felt that there were small problems between us. Sammy admitted it, but explained that it was all part of what they were doing, nothing explicit, but it seemed like everything was going according to their plan. Curious, I asked if it was just a couple of friends texting, reminiscing about old times. Sammy confirmed that it all started that way, but hinted that something had changed. I was surprised and asked if I had noticed anything suspicious. I mentioned that it seemed as if circumstances conspired to separate us, and there was a clear lack of opportunity for anyone, entertainment. Sammy looked at me incredulously, expressing a sense of disbelief. I looked at her, waiting for her next words. She encouraged me to pull my head out of the metaphorical sand, emphasizing her love for me. In response, I asked about the scale of the situation, trying to understand how serious it was. Sammy met my gaze, and her eyes flashed for a moment, giving me an unspeakable confirmation. Anger began to boil in me, and I piled on her a stream of questions about when, how, and where these meetings took place. Sammy shared that she knows that my partner has dated another guy at least 3 times in the last 2 weeks. She was unsure at first, but it wasn't until 2 days ago that Sammy became convinced that the situation had progressed. She was dating a friend who worked with Claire, and during their conversation some information slipped out. Sammy found out that Claire had met the guy twice for lunch and at least once for dinner last week. She asked if this was consistent with what I had noticed or suspected. I looked at her, absorbing her words. There had been a couple of times lately when I called her office to set up a lunch meeting, and she wasn't there or she just left. Maybe she was dating him then. Then last week, she had a seminar that she just had to take part in. It was an urgent event and organized after work. She returned home late at night, after 12 o'clock. Thinking back, she came and said that everything had dragged on, and the team went for a drink at the hotel bar to relax before leaving. There was no sex that night, I remember, and she took a shower before going to bed. My mind was in a frenzy. My thoughts were confused when I perceived these offensive facts. Sammy expressed concern, warning me not to do anything reckless that could lead to legal problems. I could feel the change in her expression when I made my decision. I declared that I would no longer tolerate such a situation and vowed to put an end to it. I confirmed that I would not tolerate my partner's infidelity and decided to punish them both for their actions. Sammy warned me against acting impulsively without a plan. Her words strangely helped me calm down, confirming that my suspicions were indeed correct. Looking for more information, I asked if she knew where my partner was at the moment. Sammy confirmed that she believes my partner is with another guy right now, explaining that this was the reason she found me. Anger flared up again, and I slammed on the table. The people in the bar turned to look when I called the bartender. I asked Sammy if she knew the exact location. Sammy explained that she didn't know the exact location, but planned to talk to my partner the next day to gather more information. She mentioned that the other guy is married and has several children, although she was not sure of his place of residence. She assured me that she would try to find out more to help with the situation. I expressed my gratitude by reaching for her hand and holding it tightly as I wiped away a tear from her cheek. I thanked her for her support and acknowledged the difficulty of the situation for her. Sammy, looking worried, inquired about my plans. I assured her that I couldn't act on my impulses just yet, but intended to definitively put an end to the situation. I promised there would be consequences without remorse for both of them. In the meantime, I planned to secure what was rightfully mine and gather evidence for my next course of action. As I finished my drink, I signaled the bartender, slipping him a note and instructing him to keep the change. Sammy continued to look concerned and asked when I planned to confront my partner. I carefully considered the situation, deciding to make some calls the next day while addressing my assets. I emphasized my determination not to give her a single penny. Sammy pointed out the difficulty of being around my partner, and I acknowledged that it had been challenging for the past few weeks. I believe that if she hadn't noticed any changes by now, she likely wouldn't in the future. Sammy stood up, expressing her need to leave. I offered to talk again tomorrow, and she agreed, promising to find out more from me. She put on her coat, and I stood to help her, feeling her closeness. She resembled her sister so much. As she looked up at me, tears in her eyes, I kissed her cheek, reassuring her that I would be fine. She smiled and left, disappearing into the dark and rainy evening. As I sat back down, I took a deep breath, contemplating my next steps. One thing was clear in my mind: they would pay, and the retaliation would be swift, relentless, and unforgiving. The next thing I remembered was waking up in my own bed, feeling as though a parrot had nested in my mouth. My head was still spinning as I lifted it off the bed. Rolling over, I noticed I was alone, and there was no sign of Claire. Slowly, my senses awakened as I heard noises coming from downstairs. Sliding my feet over the side of the bed, I attempted to stand. The following morning, as I woke up, I couldn't help but wonder about the events of the previous night. Staggering to the bathroom, attempting to shake off the grogginess, I began to awaken. Upon entering the kitchen, I found Claire there, inquiring about the state I was in. In response to her question, I vaguely mentioned having a drink with an old friend and getting carried away. Sitting down, I poured some orange juice, drank it, and poured another glass. When she probed further, asking about the friend's identity, my mind started to work. I mentioned a guy named Bob, explaining that I knew him from way back and he was in town for a couple of days on business. At the mention of Bob, I noticed a flicker of something on her face as she turned. I elaborated, recalling our college days and football years together. Claire seemed puzzled, unable to remember Bob. Nevertheless, she brushed it off, expressing indifference as long as I had fun. It was the first warning sign. Seated across from me at the table, I thought about my conversation with Sammy the previous night. Casually, I inquired about her activities the night before, feigning interest. I looked into her eyes as she lied about finishing work and going for a light meal and drinks with colleagues. She claimed to be home by 9:30, expressing concern for me due to a late meeting. I knew she wasn't home by then since I was still at home until 10 p.m., deciding to head to the bar when I had had enough. That was the second warning sign. She continued, mentioning some tasks she needed to complete in the morning and hinting at being late in the evening. Bob, an old friend, was expected to be in touch, and they had plans to catch up. I suggested inviting Bob over, emphasizing the pleasure of reconnecting with old friends. She agreed and asked if I remembered him, using an endearing term. She stared at me with a neutral expression, attempting to conceal any reaction, but I sensed something beneath the surface. Despite her poker face, I could perceive a hint of emotion. Dismissing her inquiry about inviting Bob over, I assured her that I would manage on my own. I decided to get ready for the day, having more orange juice and a couple of painkillers before leaving the house, ensuring I didn't miss the opportunity to collect my car left at the bar. 30 minutes later, I left while Claire continued preparing for her day. As I dressed, I contemplated the situation, my determination growing. This couldn't continue for much longer. I clenched my fists, angered by the thought of Claire with Bob. Vowing revenge, I harbored intense resentment towards him. The workday proved chaotic, with a constant stream of calls dealing with issues on the line. My secretary took over some of the calls, but I couldn't avoid important meetings. The tension in me increased as I progressed through the day, fueled by a growing desire for revenge. By mid-morning, the initial rush had subsided, and I almost had free time to attend to my personal affairs. I closed the door in my office and started checking my financial situation. After 15 minutes, I tightened up the scam and transferred some money to an inaccessible account. I also arranged a meeting with a lawyer to discuss a possible divorce. I still had a few days before that, so I thought it would give me time to get more information. Although it wouldn't make that much difference, it might give me some advantages. Claire had her own bank account and credit card, so she didn't have to do anything. There was access to our joint account, which was an urgent problem, but I quickly closed this hole, so if something happened, she would not be able to get more than what was left. My own account was secured and had only a small balance. The rest has been transferred and is safe. We didn't have any children, so in principle, the separation could have happened smoothly. I decided myself that we can only get through this if Claire admits her sins, so to speak, and seeks forgiveness. Any uncertainty about it, and we're done with it. This thought made me feel sad. I sat at my desk in silence, thinking about what had happened and the actions I had already taken today. Did I need more information about Bob and the evidence, or would it be enough that I knew about it to pair them up? The phone interrupted my thoughts, and it was Sammy on the line. I told her that I was busy with various thoughts and plans, but I took some action. Sammy provided additional information about the guy, Bob Stones, revealing that he is married. She had his address and place of work, obtained unobtrusively through her friend, who saw Claire with him. According to Sammy, despite their attempts to hide it, they seemed to be getting closer to each other. Recognizing the beginning of potential evidence, I asked Sammy for information about Bob. Within a few minutes, I found his social media page and got his picture. Something about his face seemed familiar to me, evoking a vague memory. Despite the uneasy feeling, I decided to call Claire around lunch, intending to wind up the situation. During the conversation, Claire explained that she had a meeting with a client named Mr. Stones, which added complexity to the situation. Suppressing my emotions, I continued the conversation about everything and nothing, although her mention of Mr. Stones seemed like a mockery. Strike number 3, I thought, deciding to take swift and merciless action against both. After finishing the conversation, I hid my anger, promising to see her later and endure her declaration of love with a clenched jaw. After finishing the conversation, anger boiled in me. Sitting there, I gritted my teeth, thinking about the disturbing revelation. My secretary appeared, looking into the office with her head, offering to buy something from the delicatessen store around the corner. After thinking for a moment, I instructed her to surprise me with something substantial, nutritious, and with plenty of red meat to taste it. She gave me a strange expression, but nodded, closing the door behind her. Sensing that my behavior had been unusual all morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was boiling under the surface. Sammy visited her sister's office and noticed Claire getting off the elevator next to a tall, dark-haired man in his early 30s, Bob Stones, a man Sammy identified from his online photo. By stepping in front of her sister, Sammy surprised Claire, who seemed somewhat uncomfortable that her plans had been disrupted. Sammy explained her sudden visit by expressing a desire to see her sister and maybe go to lunch. Claire, apparently uneasy, mentioned that she had a business meeting with Mr. Stones and offered to meet another time. Mr. Stones introduced himself, and Sammy, pretending to be innocent, asked how long he had known Claire. The question seemed unexpected to him, and Claire hurriedly took him aside, referring to a meeting they needed to attend. As she left the building and got into a waiting taxi, Sammy smiled as she watched her sister look back at her as she drove away. I was sitting in my office, nibbling on a huge sandwich filled with red meat, smiling to myself, slowly chewing it, enjoying it and thinking about my next steps. Sammy confirmed that Claire had left her office, so she called her secretary and found out that she would be out all afternoon. Well, isn't that just wonderful? Everything was ready as far as my finances were concerned, and I already had contact with the janitor with pre-agreed conditions. My lawyer was ready to act as soon as I provided the remaining information he requested. All right, tonight marked the beginning of my plan. I was determined to toy with them both before taking my final action. My father always taught me to operate in secrecy, to take the direct route and annihilate those who crossed me. He was a man of few words, but his message was clear. Perhaps I had forgotten that recently, but it was all coming back to me now. Update: that evening, when Claire returned home, she appeared normal. Nothing seemed out of place until I caught a whiff of men's cologne as I leaned in to kiss her. She noticed my reaction, and without saying a word, I lightly kissed her on the cheek and headed towards the door. Curious, she asked about my plans and if everything was all right. I assured her that I was fine, but had an urgent matter to attend to. I explained that I was going to Jerry's place for a poker game with some colleagues from work, hoping it would serve as a good distraction. Closing the door behind me, I got into my car and left the driveway, feeling a wave of frustration wash over me. Arriving at Jerry's, I parked outside and entered his garage. Jerry, a longtime friend with a history of evading the police, was skilled in combat, making him the perfect accomplice for what I had in mind. He was a substantial figure, a friend since childhood, and I had contacted him earlier to seek his assistance. Without hesitation, he agreed to lend his support without prying for details. This unwavering commitment was exactly what I needed. We silently slipped into the garage, and I changed into a pair of dark overalls and a matching ski mask. We resembled mime artists, standing in silence. No words were spoken as we climbed into a nondescript, second-hand car that Jerry had acquired. It blended into the background, unremarkable and easily forgettable. Slowly cruising across town towards the address Sammy had provided, we maintained our silence. We had already discussed the plan beforehand, so further conversation was unnecessary. Jerry parked the car outside Bob Stone's house, and we observed as he emerged from the front door, got into his car, and drove away. Jerry followed at a safe distance, neither rushed nor panicked. We already knew his destination. Parking at the driving range posed no problems, and we remained in the car, the radio softly playing in the background as we watched and waited. The tension within me was almost unbearable, making it difficult to stay still. The urge to step out and wander around was strong, but we knew it was a risk not worth taking. Gradually, the car park emptied until only a couple of vehicles remained. Both of us tensed as we watched him make his way to his car. Jerry silently exited the vehicle and stealthily approached our target. Afterwards, I drove us out of the car park without drawing any attention to ourselves. Jerry commented on the success of the operation as he removed his gloves and mask. Expressing my gratitude, I acknowledged that I appreciated his assistance. Jerry reassured me, telling me not to worry, stating that he owed me and could never fully repay me for what I had done for him. I reminded him that friends help each other, and noted that at least there were no injuries and no CCTV in the car park. We considered the job well done. Choosing to head back, Jerry suggested that we start a card game with the others who would have arrived by now. So we drove back, spending the next 4 hours playing poker for fun. The atmosphere among the guys was positive, and they understood the situation, providing the support I needed. It boosted my confidence for the impending confrontation with Claire. However, before addressing the main issue, I planned to play some mind games with her. I stumbled through the door just after 1 a.m., intentionally exaggerating the amount I had to drink. Jerry had arranged for one of the guys to drop off my car. Claire, waiting up, questioned why I was so late and examined me closely. I dismissed her concerns, explaining that Jerry and the guys had dropped me off in my car, confessing to having a bit too much JD. Ignoring my jacket and the mess on the coat pegs, I slumped onto the sofa and looked at her. Claire sat there with crossed arms and a disgusted expression. Maintaining a blank expression, I waited for her to speak. She couldn't contain herself any longer and finally asked, "What is going on, Steve? Is there someone else? You've been acting really weird lately." I chuckled, suppressing the anger boiling inside me, reminding myself to stay calm. "I'm okay, my piddle," I replied. "I've just been through a rough patch recently. It'll all be over soon." My words lingered in Claire's mind, leaving her unsure but sensing that something was off. We went to bed, and I pretended to fall into a deep sleep. It irritated her, as she seemed ready for a confrontation, but I refused to engage. The next morning, Claire was the first one up making coffee. I descended the stairs, acting obnoxious, pretending to have a hangover. Playfully entering the kitchen, I greeted her and mentioned my throbbing head. She tossed a headache remedy my way as I sipped my coffee. She appeared subdued, and I noticed her phone on the kitchen table, wondering if she had received any calls. Claire noticed my gaze on her phone, and I could sense her desire to reach for it, although doing so would seem odd. Pouring more orange juice, I casually picked up the phone. A look of panic flashed across her face as I had intercepted a message. I briefly glanced at it before sliding the phone back to her, stating that it needed charging to avoid a flat battery and any missed messages. Leaving the kitchen, I went to get dressed, leaving Claire looking after me with a sense that something was amiss. She wondered if I could know, dismissing the thought as she believed she had been careful. Their involvement had only been going on for a few weeks. Lunches, dinner 3 times, and hotel stays 3 times. She considered it nothing more than fun, confident that Steve would never find out, especially since he wasn't going without. The revelation led her to contemplate her recent intimacy with her husband, unable to recall the last time. She pondered if her neglect might have contributed to Steve's suspicions. Hastily descending the stairs, I swiftly exited the door, sidestepping Claire's attempt for a more passionate farewell. Waving and smiling, I pulled out of the driveway and headed to work. Around 11 a.m., I decided to send Claire a text for amusement, expressing regrets for the day and explaining that there was a lot on my mind, assuring her it would soon be resolved. I settled back, awaiting a reaction. Later in the day, Sammy visited me, inquiring about what had happened. I questioned Sammy about her earlier statement, asking her what she meant. Earlier in the day, an employee from the golf club had found Bob Stones in the trunk of his car, badly beaten. Claire had informed Sammy, and she was shaken. Sammy asked if I had done it, and I responded that I didn't care too much either way, denying any involvement. I went on to mention that Claire had told me she found out about Bob's condition through a scheduled meeting with him. His company had called, stating he was in the hospital and his wife had called them. Sammy found my explanation cute and plausible, but suggested that maybe next time it wouldn't be so easy for them. I was asked about my cryptic remark and I replied, saying that accidents happen in the strangest places. That night, upon arriving home, Claire was absent and her car was gone. There was no message. Irritated, I called her phone, cheerfully inquiring about her whereabouts. She responded, explaining that she was at the hospital visiting a friend, assuring me it wouldn't be long. I expressed my hope for her friend's swift recovery, bid her goodbye, and hung up before she could respond. 30 minutes later, she returned looking drained. I asked about her friend's condition, expressing my hope that it wasn't too serious. Claire hesitated before responding, mentioning that it was nothing too dramatic. Her friend had just fallen and would be home in a few days. I suggested coffee, and she accepted, thanking me. While sipping her coffee, Claire brought up an incident at her workplace, mentioning that one of her company's reps had been assaulted the other night. I reacted with surprise, asking for details. She explained that he was attacked and left in his car overnight, but reassured me that he was okay. Bob wasn't hurt too badly, and it seemed like they wanted to mess him up for no reason. Nothing was stolen or anything. I couldn't help but think about the contradiction, given my prior denial of knowing Bob. Update. She noticed me looking at her and realized she had made a mistake. She tried to cover it up, but she knew it was too late. Now I was aware of the situation as well quickly. She hurried to make an exit to change. I suspected she would be on the phone any second, but to whom? I decided I needed to reassess my plan. Since things were escalating, I had to move things forward a bit, calling upstairs to Claire. I informed her I needed to go out for a little while, reassuring her I wouldn't be long. I drove to Bob Stone's home address and knocked on the door. A petite, dark-haired woman opened the door. I explained that I was Steve Rayland, and my wife, Claire Rayland, had dealings with her husband. She looked at me nervously, yet intrigued. I requested to come in for a moment. In the lounge, she realized the gravity of the situation, as I mentioned the affair between Claire and her husband. I expressed my regret for having to break the news and informed her that he was currently in the hospital. She folded inwardly, tears flowing for a few seconds. Expressing her suspicions, she mentioned that she knew he was at it again and decided to divorce Claire. She felt that Claire had enough chances to come clean and the lies were unbearable. Unsure of how long the affair had been going on, she was convinced of Claire's betrayal. When I inquired about the incident the other night, she admitted uncertainty. I clarified that I didn't lay a finger on him and expressed my shock at the situation. Indicating my lack of concern about whoever damaged him, I mentioned that I couldn't be sorry about it. I questioned if he might have been involved with another man's wife, to which she responded, "Nothing surprises me." She decided to keep him out of her life, emphasizing that they had moved back to the area because he was fooling around. Before leaving, I provided her with my locksmith's and solicitor's contact information, realizing the complexity of the situation. As I drove slowly home, I focused on dealing with the other half of my problem. My inner rage was under control, understanding that once retribution began, it would run its course, a course of action I would follow and relish for the most part. The end of my marriage saddened me, but I knew there was no going back from her betrayal. My one consolation was that the parties that caused me pain would experience it in far greater measure. I do not forgive. Update. I guided my car on the driveway, noticing Claire's car exactly where she had left it just a couple of hours ago. Absent-mindedly tapping the bonnet as I passed, I approached my front door and slid my key into the lock. A heavy feeling settled in my heart, realizing this might be the last time I'd do this as a married man. Stepping inside, the weight of the recent worries pressed on my shoulders, making them incredibly heavy as I slowly moved towards the lounge. The murmur of the television greeted me as I neared the doorway. There, perched on the sofa, was Claire, her demeanor radiating fear and trepidation. A sense that something was amiss hung in the air, as if the game was up without a word being spoken. Nervously, she shook, trying to maintain composure. I stood, silently watching her, and as our eyes met, I saw fear and an attempt to speak, but nothing escaped her lips. Walking into the room, I passed her to fix myself a drink. Remaining silent, I reached for my drink, my unblinking eyes locked onto hers. She waited, sensing something was amiss. My expression remained impassive as I observed the woman I had deeply loved, now balancing those feelings with the pain she had needlessly caused me. It was time for her to feel my pain. As I stared, she detected no reason for optimism in my face. Pulling herself together, Claire straightened up, deciding to brazen it out. Unaware of what I knew, she couldn't endure the incriminating silence any longer. She asked where I had been, and frustration crept into her voice at my silent treatment. I responded, saying that I would tell her where I went if she told me where she had been. Uncertainty flickered in her eyes as she insisted she was at the hospital visiting a friend. I maintained a blank expression, and fear flashed across her eyes. She was rattled. Once again, she deflected the question back to me, thinking she had skillfully batted it away. I told her to stop the nonsense and explained that I'd visited a friend myself, someone I hadn't known for long. Our conversation was crucial, and although I hadn't visited a friend myself, someone I hadn't known for long. Our conversation was crucial, and although I hadn't met her before, we were now friends of sorts. I had an enlightening talk with her about her husband, Bob Stones, asking if she had heard of him. Her face flushed as I toyed with her emotions. I explained that I needed to talk to the Stones woman about her husband's infidelity, having discovered his affair. In response to my revelation, she offered concern, asking if I was okay and offering to get me a drink. I inquired about her knowledge of Bob Stone's affairs, watching her struggle to find words. I took the lead, telling her that I knew about her involvement with Bob and had known for a while. I challenged her to speak up before leaving, emphasizing that it didn't mean anything and was just closeness. I scoffed at her excuses, reminding her of the vows we both took. As she continued to defend herself, I called her out, expressing my frustration with her lies. I pointed out that she treated me like a fool and her attempts to downplay the affair infuriated me. I sarcastically commented on the claim that it only happened twice and questioned whether it was worth our marriage. She apologized, claiming it didn't mean anything and expressing a willingness to make it up to me. I laughed bitterly, accusing her of being sorry for getting caught and questioning whether she would have stopped if not exposed. I asserted that all the lies she told became second nature, and only she believed them. I told her that she was not the woman I fell in love with and married, and she looked at me as the weight of my hurt started to penetrate her cheater's facade. She realized the seriousness of the situation, and she asked what she could do, promising to do anything. I informed her that we were done and called Sammy, letting her know about the situation. Sammy would be arriving shortly to pick her up. Claire, shocked, asked where she would go, and I responded harshly, saying she could go wherever she liked, even back to the hospital to see her boyfriend. I didn't care, we were done. Claire sat stunned as there was a knock on the door. I greeted Sammy and told her to get Claire out of here. I explained that if she didn't leave, I was afraid of what I might do to her. Despite hating what she had done, I still cared about her, but it was time for her to go. Sammy hurriedly gathered Claire's things for the next few days. I thanked Sammy for her assistance and mentioned that I would be in contact soon. As Sammy prepared Claire to leave, I listened to the sound of my wife sobbing. Sammy swiftly packed Claire's belongings into a couple of suitcases, and in less than 10 minutes, she was removed from my home. The real challenge would be to get her out of my life permanently and erase the pain. Retribution would help with that. Staring into the flames of the pyre I had built in the backyard, I watched everything of Claire's go up in flames. There was no way I would allow her back into my house for anything.